And ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to begin. Please take your seats. His Excellency, the President of the Parliament of Aruba, Mr. Marlon Snake. His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Aruba, Mr. Mike Ayman. Honorable members of the Parliament of Aruba, Council of the Ministers, distinguished guests, speakers, visitors, and colleagues. Bon dia, good morning, and welcome to day 2 of the Common Good Conference. Bon dia. Thank you very much. My name is Rosabel Iles, and it is my pleasure to accompany you this morning and later this afternoon as we celebrate this inspiring occasion. Yesterday, we hosted the Common Good Expo, where organizations from across our community came together to showcase their contributions to society. The event also featured a series of panel discussions that invited us to reflect on what the common good means today, how we collaborate, and how we choose to live with one another in a modern world. Today, we continue that journey, connecting big ideas in local realities and local stories to the wider global conversation. As we do so, we are reminded that the common good is indeed reached through action, but it begins with reflection and intention. To help us enter in that reflection together, please join me in welcoming Pastor Grant.
Good morning, everyone. Can we stand as we open up in a word of prayer this morning? If you don't mind, can we please bow our heads? Gracious and generous God, as a people we pause together in gratitude and in gratefulness for all you have done, and for most importantly, for the great things you are about to do. We as a people are extremely elated for the converging of this community of great leaders gathered in ideation and initiation. We acquiesce today as a people that none of us stands alone, but in solidarity and in spirit. Father, even though today we all may have different minds, may we all in this moment mind the same thing to bring about the common good for all people. Father, as we attempt to establish and expand what we've never known or seen before, we extract a page from the script of the sage named Solomon, and we solicit wisdom from you, Heavenly Father, on how to lead your people. For we as leaders will be remiss if we totally rely on human intelligence alone. But we want to reside in divine intelligence to receive the aptitude in the natural on how to accomplish what we are aiming for in this moment. Father, the idea of the common good excludes today individualism, and it exclaims that as individuals, we are interested in investing with other insightful leaders, that we can play an intricate part in framing the future of our people. Father, today most of all, we ask humbly and kindly for our Genesis moment, the time when you look back and saw that everything you created was good. I pray on the convening and the commencement of this great concept, may everything we are able to look back at, we will recognize that it has been good. So we ask today, Father, that you bless our work with vision of prosperity that is shared among all, where success is not measured by just accumulation, but success will be the flourishing of our people, of our neighborhoods, and our generations to come. Strengthen, Father, our commitment to stand for one another, that collaboration replaces competition and compassion shapes every decision made here today. Father, I pray and close with the mind and the thought of the prayerful and profound psalmist known as David. In Psalms 23, when David prayed, "The Lord is our shepherd." Father, we ask that you be our shepherd today, or be our source. He makes us to lie down in green pastures. Father, whatever the need is today, be our provision. He leads us beside still waters. Whatever as a people, as a country we are facing, Father, be our peace today. He restores our soul. We pray for divine comfort today. He anoints our heads with oil. Our cup runs over. Father, we ask that you be the potential of everyone in this room gathered this morning. Goodness and mercy shall follow us all the days of our life. Heavenly Father, most of all, we ask that you be our protection for our government, for our leaders, for our business sector, for our education system, for our neighborhoods, our communities. May no weapon that is formed against us shall be able to prosper. And we ask these things in the matchless name, the name of Jesus Christ. And if you agree this morning, everybody say amen.
Thank you, Pastor Grant, for that beautiful morning reflection. And as reflection gives way to expression, we now turn to music as another way of strengthening our sense of community. Tribo is a new musical collective by cultural ambassador of Aruba, Michael Lampe, with vocals by Nichelle Cruz, Stephanie Gravenhorst, Raquel Lampe, and Lislaine Bermudez. On the guitar, Ephraim Angela. On the percussion, Jair Breton. And on the cello, Tracy Alders. Here to perform their reimagined version of Cariño by Chicas Gaiteras, let's welcome Michael Lampe and Tribo.
Riqueza di más grande, o mundo de mister, no da joya ni diamante, no da placa ni oro ni plata ni perla ni la mar.
Vivo cinta, penso un rato, un momento reflexionar. Lo morí para no ser ingrato, no saber de valor, amistad, humildad y cariño.
Papa Dios, dame más fuerza para me seguir con el lucha de la final. Trece cariño, eliminar el diccionario enemistad. Trece paz, trece cariño. tiempo no tan importa. Temporada de amor y paz. Y mi mama y una Tarabia ostina Ta quien de nos para nos luchar.
Tá difícil a pedir. Cuba come terror na. Tá boiuta promeva se me adore se prejuízo.
Papá Dios, dame más fuerza pa' mi circo y lucharte en la final. Crece paz, crece cariño, eliminar el diccionario enemistad. Crece paz, crece cariño, 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 cariño. Crece cariño, 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 cariño.
Eliminar el diccionario enemistad. Y crece paz más su riqueza. Más grande como el mundo tiene estar. No te voy a ni diamante, no te plata ni oro ni
Crece cariño, 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 cariño. Crece cariño.
Uy. Thank you. Give it up for Michael Lampe and Tribo. Thank you so much. Thank you to our musicians for beginning this morning with culture and care. Cariño indeed. And stay tuned. We have more musical performances in the afternoon as well as to end our conference today. Our official opening continues as we invite His Excellency, the Minister of Tourism, Transport, and Labor, to deliver the opening remarks. Please welcome Mr. Wendrick Cecilia. I may have lost him. See if AJ, give me a sign. And you said he's right there, but I can't see him. If you see him, then there's something wrong with me, right? Maybe we do a chant. Wendrick, Wendrick. All right, ladies and gentlemen, he's going to explain where he was. Mr. Wendrick Cecilia.
Thank you. Thank you. Doesn't fit, no problem. Ladies and gentlemen, the home we build together. Also seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prosper, you too will prosper. Jeremiah 29:7. This was the message directly from God to the people of Jerusalem when they were in Babylon. Work for the peace and the prosperity of your city and your people, because if it prosper, you too will prosper. This powerful call reminds us that God invites us to intentionally and strategically to pursue and seek shared flourishing rather than solely individual self-interest. Rooted in love and justice, we are called to seek the blessing, the prosperity, and also the well-being of the community to which we belong. In other words, governments, government institutions, businesses, civil society can build thriving economies, united communities, and renewed trust in public institutions if we collectively and deliberately seek the common good. Ladies and gentlemen, dames en heren, dames caballero, friends, vrienden, amigo lang, welcome to the International Common Good Conference with the title, The Home We Build Together. His Excellency Prime Minister of Aruba, Mike Eman, our esteemed guests, our international speakers here present today, members of parliament, colleague ministers, and all who are present today, good morning. Especially to our international speakers and esteemed guests, welcome to Aruba. Welcome to the One Happy Island. And I think we all can agree that there's no more fitting place for this moment of reflection than beneath the warmth of the sun and embraced by the warmth of the Aruban people. It is an immense honor for me to be delivering the opening statement at this magnificent conference. Around the world, and also governments elsewhere, are searching for answers. In Aruba, also, we are looking for answers. For the contemporary challenges we face as a nation. We see around the world, but also in the last couple of years on Aruba, we see a growing resistance to the conventional economic model. We see social cohesion decreasing. We see community life fragmenting, and also we see individualism rising and trust in government declining. But in the midst of crisis and in search for purpose and a shared vision, we have discovered a guiding star, the common good and the pursuit of the common good, a principle capable of uniting a community, restoring dignity, trust, hope, and especially motivate and energize us to place people, not capital, markets, or systems, at the center. The idea of the common good is an ancient treasure, rediscovered and brought powerfully into public debate by leaders gathered here with us today. Today, and over 2 millennia ago, Aristotle was discerning the meaning and the fitting goals for good human life. Much of his moral reflection was devoted to determining the nature of the goods people should seek. Based on his understanding of morality and conviction, the good life is one devoted to the pursuit of good purposes or ends. His most significant conclusion was that the good life is oriented to shared goods with others, the common good of the society of which one is a part. The good life of an individual and the common good are inseparable. The common good must guide public policy, economic models, business strategies, and our individual lives. In the wise words of Aristotle, the good of the city clearly is greater and more perfect thing to attain and to safeguard, because to seek the good of a nation and its people is nobler and more divine. These insights remain profoundly relevant today, ladies and gentlemen. This conference marks a turning point. It calls us to embrace a paradigm shift, not only a political and economic paradigm shift, but also to answer to a calling, a moral and divine calling that we all know. Love your neighbor as yourself, and in humility, value one another. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the common good. This conference, ladies and gentlemen, is a unique moment. And I can remember when our Prime Minister firstly introduced this topic and subject into the public debate of Aruba. This conference is a dream come true for our Prime Minister, Mike Eamon, because he leads with purpose and embraced this public task of restoring the common good as a guiding star for public institutions and our community. Aruba will be known for his ambition to be the showcase of how common good can be put into practices in the kingdom, but also in the Caribbean. As I say, our Prime Minister is leading with purpose, not only restoring and rebuilding neighborhoods, strengthening purchasing power, reforesting Aruba, but also restoring the moral foundation on which we can continue to build on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a noble and a divine calling, and our Prime Minister of Aruba, Mike Eamon, is embracing this calling. I can remember when the topic was first introduced, Prime Minister of Aruba went to each and every neighborhood of this country, of this nation, to speak about the common good. The common good message was distributed in the neighborhoods, in the Parliament of Aruba, but also in the Netherlands during different conferences, and was based on the bigger picture. Because sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, we are blinded by individualism that we cannot see the bigger picture. We cannot see the people after the data. Ladies and gentlemen, great leaders show us the way forward. And our Prime Minister was pioneer in introducing the concept of the common good as a public value, as a guiding star that could lead us to the promised land. As we say, and as we place the common good as our guiding star, ladies and gentlemen, economies begin to serve human well-being. Governments address the real struggles of daily life. Happiness, opportunity, and prosperity are shared by all. And communities unite, and the common good is a national aspiration that will guide us to a new dimension. Prime Minister of Aruba, thank you for your inspiration, because we know and we walk together, and this topic and subject was all that we can talk about during car rides, during visits, during meetings in our party house. This was the main topic, and now it's the main topic of the government of Aruba and Gabinete AVP Futuro. Ladies and gentlemen, history remembers leaders who put their work where their words are pointing. Prime Minister of Aruba, Mike Eamon, knows that leadership loses its meaning when it distances himself from the people he claims to serve. Every Thursday, our Prime Minister is in the neighborhood helping people solving their daily problems, relieving daily struggles, but also a helping hand for all of those in need. Putting common good into practice, my friends, is one of the most noble things we can do as human beings. Let this moment, let today be a start of activating the common good in each and every one of our lives. Because, as Aristotle stated, there is no greater thing, no nobler thing, no divine thing than the service and put oneself in the service of one another. And this is for governments, for government institutions, for civil society, for businesses, and for social partners. Friends, the pursuit of the common good is the light in the middle of the darkness, is a compass that can guide us home, and is the force that will unite our community. As we begin this conference, let us remember, friends, that faith without work is dead. The pursuit of the common good starts today. Fe sin obra è morto. The philosophy, common good, needs to be put in practices. This, today, will be the purpose and the mission of this conference, to activate in each mind and heart the willingness and also the ability to put the common good into practice. Because if we unite as a community, together we are smarter, healthier, richer, and able to govern a just and stable democracy. May we be inspired, challenged, transformed by the wisdom shared here today. God bless you all. Welcome to the International Common Good Conference. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you very much, Minister Cecilia. When we hear the term common good, it might sound familiar, almost obvious. We might think we already know what it means, perhaps through common sense. But intuition can be misleading. What seems common to one group may not be so to another. Does it require deeper reflection to understand what truly serves us all? What is the common good? Luckily, I do not have to answer this philosophical question today, as we have with us someone who has spent a great deal of time investigating moral dilemmas in business, in governance, and in public policy. He can help us move beyond intuition toward understanding. He is a philosopher and public intellectual whose research focuses on moral economy, leadership ethics, and the role of virtue in education and public life. A recipient of the 2019 Socrates Cup for the Best Philosophy Book, he is known for connecting academic insights to pressing societal debates. Today, he will explore the question at the heart of this conference. What is the common good? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Jelle van Baardewijk.
It's fantastic to be here. I live in the Netherlands with my 3 children and wife, and it's great to feel so at home here. I haven't been away from home for 5 days, to be honest, since I have children. Not something to be proud of, but at the same time, something I feel safe by, and I think it's good. Part of my idea of the common good. But I want to say hi to my children as well. So the common good. To be honest, we have many definitions, many ways to refer to the common good. So what I want to share with you is a historical perspective, but perhaps opening with a very basic and very broad definition, saying that the common good refers to the practices, the habits, the norms and values that we share, and together constitute our culture, our society, make our life in our community worth living, increases our quality of life. That's a very broad definition, consisting of descriptive and normative aspects. Now, when I first entered the hotel here in Aruba, and I'm here for 6 days, it was already clear to me that there are different ideas of the common good over here. Roughly speaking, there's a divide, yes, between hospitality, the people like me, the tourists, in hotels, and the people living in Aruba, partly facilitating the lives in hotels. I don't know this divide from at home. So I live in a normal village with many families, so I was surprised by the luxury, the decadence, but also the comfort, the joyful meals, I mean. And I was wondering, oh, it must be tough for a young boy or girl in Aruba to grow up here and find inspiration in all those people from America and the Netherlands that have these comfortable lives here, luxury dinners every day. That was the one side of the common good here. The other side, thanks to Wendrik, Michael, Mike and Man, who introduced me to what it's like behind the touristical scenes. The real community of Aruba, you could say. Although, you have two souls, huh? So what's real? It's both worlds, both modernization and this ensoulment of community life. And then I discovered many interesting things. Also the importance of family life, but for instance also the appreciation of languages, Spanish, Dutch, Capiamento, of course. So it's a multilingual society. Well, the Netherlands is not. So joyful to experience so many languages and people that you can speak to in, well, at least 3 languages. Not everyone, of course, not the younger, but hey. But also you see a clash between those two identities, huh? And well, that's my basic experience here in Aruba. A lot more to say about it, but we'll come back to that later on. Now, from the history of philosophy scene, what can we learn about the common good? First of all, perhaps it's true that Aristotle coined the notion, or quite pretty sure about it, but of course, also before Aristotle, in every even primitive society, you have an idea of the common good. So people have practices, shared practices of raising their children, sports, crafts, pursuing their goals. This is not something that Aristotle in Athens invented, but he described it. Now, why did he describe? Why did he start describing it? He was exploring the question, what does it mean to be a good life? What does it mean to be a good person? And then he didn't do this in isolation, but he did this in the context of, well, very comparable to this day and age, populism, fierce economical forces, a world in turmoil. And he wrote in his books, the Ethics, the Ethica Nicomacheia, and his politics about, well, ethics, what we call ethics. The question, what does it mean, the good life? What is a joyful life in the moral sense of the word? I'm not talking about laying on the beach. I'm talking about taking responsibility. And so he did this in contrast to a society in turmoil. And then he describes, and I think quite convincingly, even more than 2,000 years later, that the good life starts with the smaller practices in which we live. That what teachers do, that what parents do, what parenthood is, very, very important. But also, of course, identity on a higher level. Now, and that is very interesting in Aruba. Eh? What is Aruba? What is Athens? What was Sparta? Now, Aristotle, in contrary to what current or contemporary philosophers would do, or even Enlightenment philosophers, was inclined to speak of the community in terms of its locality. So he was actually talking about Athens, the good life in Aruba, not the good life in Amsterdam. It was a localized idea of the common good, very interesting. And he used notions such as telos, meaning something like, the goal of the shared practices we have, the goals, the telos, teloi. So there was a normative aspect in his description of what a good Athenian society was. So it had aristocratic aspects, not democratic aspects, aristocratic. What does it mean? It means that a good society cultivates virtues which you can, well, align with, which you can internalize as a person, hopefully implying that you will end up being courageous and justful as well. So you internalize these ideas, these practices, these standards of excellence, as the philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre tends to call them. And that allows you to develop yourself as a citizen. So citizenhood is not, oh, you're born here and thus you're part of Athens. No. You need to be introduced into the shared standards. You need to grow up. You need to learn. You need to learn to protect the common good. So it's not an idea of multiculturalism or diversity. It's rather an idea of the common good in terms of normality. You need to normalize and internalize the shared standards and virtues. Now, this is completely different from how we tend to describe the good life. The good life is, how do you fulfill your ideas, how do you make something out of your talents, how do you grow old, maybe become rich, become successful. For Aristotle, becoming a good person also means becoming a good member of the city-state. Now, during the history, many things happened. Christianity, for instance, the tradition of in which the philosopher Thomas von Aquino stands, says, well, the common good is not enough. We need the spirit. So we need transcendence. And I think Thomas has a fair point in there. Society and its aristocratic values is not all there is. There's more between heaven and earth. So that's what the Christians add. But then something interesting happens in modernity. Philosophers such as Thomas Hobbes and John Locke actually desubstantialize the idea of the common good. So what they say comes down to see the common good as an airport where you arrive and where you can take your plane. It's an infrastructure. And within the infrastructure, you can flourish. And the infrastructure is very safe, and that's also very good. But in the end, it's not a goal in itself. That's the telos that Aristotle did connect to the idea of the common good. And so in modernity, we lost the Greco-Christian tradition of a substantial account of the common good. Now, this also implied a process of emancipation, because of course, I mean, if the common good is only an infrastructure, a lot more people can flourish. Diversity becomes an important thing, diversity of opinions, viewpoints, but also types of people. So this created, in the end, globalized world without too much local communities or even clans, and even eventually also not things like nation states, but people cooperating in a worldwide society as individuals. Now, modern philosophy legitimizes this position in terms of laws, in terms of you have the right to be who you are a member of humanity, and you have human rights. And in philosophy, as already mentioned previously, you have this big discussion between authors that describe life in terms of rights and life in terms of the common good. And we are here on a conference of the common good, so it's good to realize that this is a big divide also in the philosophical discourse, the philosophical theories. And I think that it's very good to go back a little bit more to the common good tradition. Why? Because we see that if we do not protect the common good, because it's not only theory, it's not only Aristotle, Aquino, they describe something in reality. And in modern theories, we lost sight over it. And what happened is other forces, individualization, but also capitalism, in all its goodness. I'm not against capitalism at all. I think working is important, disciplining, creativity is important, even hiring and firing people, even maybe becoming rich. I don't know. I'm not against it. I'm even in favor of it. But nevertheless, what we see is a development of a certain American type of capitalism that is exploitative towards your community, towards my community in the Netherlands, perhaps even towards the Kingdom of the Netherlands in which we both live. Now, what we have forgotten in the theoretical reflection, I think, is that if you don't cultivate the shared common good, if you don't connect ideas to it, for instance, that you need to protect your own languages and your own local beaches, that you need to protect your own practices, your own students, then if you don't do that, the process of globalization, partly capitalism, partly Hollywood, partly the ideology of world citizenship and its shallowness. We all know that European cinema has a certain quality that's different from Hollywood. We all know that your local music has a fantastic, intimate and souled quality that you cannot find on Spotify in America or even in the Netherlands. So local traditions need to be nourished. What we see is that these local traditions, well, if you don't have an idea of the common good, it's hard to say that they need to be nourished. So that's, in the end, I think, what we can learn from the Aristotelian tradition, that the common good is something that is in need for protection. It needs to be, you need to fight for it. And you need to understand that in history, many of our forefathers and mothers did so. So at a certain moment, the Netherlands arose out of history. Yes? This is not only a crazy thing. It was people that united and thought, well, we don't want to work with the Spanish anymore. They raise taxes, they do things we don't like, they don't speak our language, so we want to be ourselves. And this is something that happens in cities. This is something that has happened in Aruba. And I know that we are also related in a historical sense, in a colonial sense, but you need to reflect together on what do we share and what is it that makes that we want to be with each other and what is it that we maybe don't want to be with each other. I think, to be honest, that we've ignored this question too much in the Netherlands, so there's much more to share with Aruba and the Netherlands than is generally spoken of in Dutch newspapers. It's very odd, but it's the way things have developed. But I'm giving you this example just to also pinpoint at the historical fact that the historical development was not only, we started at communities with Aristotle, and then came Aquino, added a bit of spirituality, and then we emancipated into individuals. No, in the end, even in the 19th century, new countries emerged, and that was also necessary. Why? To protect ourselves. Against what? Well, against, not necessarily against people, also against ideas and practices that didn't nourish the way we wanted to live together. This can be very concrete. Think of the loss of language or the loss of the ability to visit your own beach, but it can also be, well, a more spiritual. So the common good can also be, yeah, well, the way we believe in Jesus or the way we have spiritual practices, they don't match, they don't fit into the Roman scheme or they don't fit into the Southern Dutch scheme. So we want to do things our own way. Now, the question is, of course, how does, it's easier said than done, huh? It's easier said than done. So the common good can become a new spiritual idea. We need to do it, we need to strive for it. But philosophers, especially a philosopher like Aristotle, also learned us that it requires us to act in a certain way. Huh? So we need to try to be more virtuous. We need to be courageous. We need to teach each other how to be courageous, not to be cocky and rich and arrogant, but humble, and but also not coward. But we need to act. We need to build institutions. We need to neglect our own animal spirits. And if we endorse our animal spirits, we need to do it in a, well, common good way. So I do in the end think that a hotel-orientated country, a hospitality-orientated country or city like Amsterdam as well, or Barcelona, of course, you can relate this to the common good. But it's difficult, but you can. But it comes down to, well, how do you teach each other what you find important? Raise the quality of the services you offer, the goods you offer. And in the end, that's also about virtues. Huh? So, what is good work? What is good family life? Do you live in a society in which you, well, stimulate parenthood? So it's kind of my own preoccupation, being a father, but nevertheless, it's already you see in the work of the classical authors that it's important to realize that the system of diplomacy, of politics, of business, of course, rests in a humus layer of culture in which families, friendships are key. And after that comes education and sports. But families are very, very, very important. Huh? So you need policy to create this. So it's not something only that that grows out of the bottom from itself. Huh? So it's also a lesson that you can learn from institutional philosophers. You need to stimulate it, protect it, subsidize it, and then maybe it starts flourishing. You cannot expect people to individually create the ideal idea of what it is to be a father or a mother. They need examples, they need stimulation, they need help, they need money, they need places to work. So institutions are important to create the common good. So on the one hand, it's a typical NGO thing in this day and age, a civil society thing. You helping in the neighborhood, not for money, not because of the government asked for it. At the other end, unfortunately, you need the state, you need family life, you need these other institutions. So it's not only something you can leave up to the people with extra time in the civil society. And in the end, I think, maybe you also need nation states and some national consciousness, a sense of belonging, of being here in Aruba or being in the Netherlands. And to be honest, I think the Aruban people are pretty proud on who they are, wearing their own flags and discussing what culture and habits you have over here in the Netherlands. We are, in a way, maybe ahead of you. In America also, more modern, you could say, but we lost part of this identity. And it's becoming part of the process of polarization, in which some people say, I'm Dutch, and other people say, no, I'm European, I'm a citizen of the world, and we all have human rights. So it's polarized. It's fiercely polarized. You don't want to end up there. A good idea of the common good is, of course, that there are differences of opinion. A good common good culture has this tolerance for difference. You don't need to agree on everything. It's the humus layer that you want to create, in which people can have different types of opinion. Of course, that's important. And maybe in the end, it's nevertheless better to do this on a national scale. So in the end, that would be my question to you. It's different to be in Aruba than in Curaçao or Bonaire and in the Netherlands. At the same time, you do share things. Yeah? But in the current, I would say, Western ideology, of course, this is not a thing. You cannot say this anymore. This is a political standpoint. So I admit that I have this political standpoint. But I think that the common good, you cannot isolate this from this political question. The common good is not something that much localized. You need some scale, like the scale of an island. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. van Baardewijk, for setting the conceptual stage. Our next speaker brings the idea of the common good home right here in Aruba. Esther Emerencia Gomez is the director of Post Aruba NV, where she leads the modernization and strategic strengthening of Aruba's National Postal Service while safeguarding its public mandate. A graduate of the University of Aruba, she brings leadership experience across public, corporate, and civic sectors with a strong focus on governance and people-centered leadership. She previously served as policy advisor to the Prime Minister Mike Eamon and as president of the Kiwanis Club of San Nicolas, where she led initiatives in youth development, social impact, and community well-being. Esther is widely respected for her service-oriented leadership and commitment to the common good. Today, she will reflect on community as the foundation of the common good, drawing on personal narratives and cultural memory. Through stories of collective home building in Aruba, she will explore the shift from me to we and invites us all to recognize our shared responsibility in building communities where trust, belonging, and well-being can flourish together. Please join me in welcoming Esther Emerencia Gomez.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Buen dia. First of all, I want to say that this is an honor to be able to be a part of this conference with so many philosophers, political leaders, and thinkers, but most of all, to be able to share this space with you all who are members of our community. I want to welcome those that have joined us from far. And as you know, Aruba is known around the world as one happy island. People come here chasing that promise. They come in pursuit of the Aruban dream. El sueño arubano, as Michael Lampe puts it. Or, as we could say, in pursuit of happiness. My grandfather was no different. He was an orphan, a fisherman from La Guajira, Colombia, with nothing but courage, strong hands, and hope in his heart. He crossed the sea by boat and arrived on this island paradise. Here he met my grandmother. They fell in love and got married, and he never left Aruba. But building a life is one thing. Building a home is another. In his pursuit of happiness, in his pursuit of el sueño arubiano, my grandfather tried to get a mortgage. But as you can imagine, being a fisherman, he was not eligible. And for many, that would have been the end of the dream. But on this island, the island of Aruba, hope does not live alone. Members of the community stepped forward. Men who understood that what one could not do alone, many could do together. They formed a simple pact. No contracts, no lawyers, just trust. They helped each other build each other's homes, one by one. Each man working on another's house, knowing that one day the same hands who helped raise his own walls. And in time, every family had a home. And some still practice this pact up to today. Not because of lack of money, but because of togetherness. They achieved more because they were together. Togetherness allowed them to move from the me to the we. And that is where today's conversation begins. Because when we talk about the home we built together, we are really talking about community. Community is the family that lives in that home. As individuals, we are limited. But when we join together, we create something far greater than ourselves. So I want to pause for a moment and ask all of us, not as leaders, not as professionals, but as people. What kind of home are we building together? Because the truth is, we, all of us here today, and those who could not make it, are all builders. We are builders through our decisions, through our policies, through our actions. But sadly, somewhere along the way, in our pursuit of happiness, in our pursuit of success and of our dreams, we have begun to build alone. We became more connected digitally, yet more distant relationally. We became more productive, yet more isolated. And the cost of this individualism is not abstract. We feel it. We all feel it. The community feels it. In rising anxiety, in loneliness, in carrying too much by ourselves. We were never meant to live this way. From the very beginning, or as Pastor Grant so eloquently put it, from the Genesis, a truth was spoken over humanity. The Lord God said, "It is not good for man to be alone." And this was not a suggestion. It was not an observation, but a design principle. We were created for relationship. We were created for fellowship. We were created for community. Isolation is not strength. It is not success, because humans are built to stand together. Community is not optional, it is essential. It is where burdens are shared, where joy multiplies, where wounds are seen and healed. So, does the rebuilding of our community require slogans? Does the rebuilding of our community require intentions? No. The rebuilding of our community requires people showing up. It sounds simple, but it's pretty difficult. Community is built intentionally, brick by brick, moment by moment, relationship by relationship. My grandfather never built his home alone. He built it with others. They simply chose we over me. And because they did, a house became a home, a group became a community, and a dream became reality. That home still stands today, not just in concrete and wood, but in the values it was built on and that I carry before you here today. So in closing, before all of us leave here later today, the question remains with us. What kind of home are we building? And more importantly, will we be willing to build it together? I will quote our criollo salmista, Michael Lampe. Solamente junto nos se logra un sueño humano, un sueño arubiano.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Esther, for localizing the common good. Our next speaker is a leading Dutch philosopher whose work explores ethics, culture, authority, and the moral foundations of society. He is an associate professor of social and cultural philosophy at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam and coordinator of the master's program in philosophy of culture and governance. He also serves as chairman of the association Beter Onderwijs Nederland and the media platform De Nieuwe Wereld, and is the author of several influential books, including The Crisis of Authority, a philosophical exploration of a shaky social order. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Ad Verbrugge.
Yeah, thank you very much for this kind introduction. And of course, my great thanks to Mike Eamon for inviting us, and me and my partner, to Aruba. I'm here for the first time in my life, and it's really a great experience. And of course, this invitation was related to a topic that's very important to me, the idea of the common good. Well, in my vision, the erosion or the loss of this the sense for the common good is one of the main reasons nowadays of the current political crisis, and I would even say the turmoil in the Western world we are witnessing these days. As I set out in my book, De Gezagscrisis, about 2 years ago, the order of the Western world has become shaky, fragile. Yeah. And I think what we're witnessing right now is the end of globalization as we knew it in the last decades. And it's not only by the forces outside the West. We are challenged by Russia, we're challenged by China, India, but also forces inside the West itself. I think we see everywhere we see the rise of populism and growing inner tensions within countries, fragmentation and polarization, and I think that that points to a systemic crisis. In a way, you could say, and that's one of my ideas I put forward the last year, that in fact the West is witnessing its own 1989. Yeah? History doesn't repeat itself, but in a way it rhymes. And now we are confronted in the West with maybe the inner contradictions of an economic order, like the communism experienced in the 80s. So in fact, maybe the primacy of globalization in the West as an economic project is confronted with its inner contradictions, and populism is one of the manifestations of that contradictions. So in my view, Trump, yes, that's the right moment to drop something. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, okay. How do they call it? Coincidence, or like Jung called it, happening, two things happening at the same time. Yeah. Good. Well, Trump is in a way a pivotal figure. I think he's shaking up the order we're living in, and like Gorbachev did. Yeah, and maybe it's for you a strange comparison, but in fact, Gorbachev saw that communism, as it developed itself, couldn't be sustained anymore in the way it did, and he tried to change it within the communist world. And I'm not comparing the personalities. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, but I think what started with Gorbachev, in fact, brought a serious disruption in the communist world, as we saw by the end of the 80s. And in a way, I think Donald Trump is doing the same. He's ending globalism as it developed itself for the last decades, and it's disrupting the whole Western world as it was, even NATO at the moment. Yeah? And we will see what will happen. I think nobody can tell what will happen the next few years. But one thing is sure, that we have the obligation now, also as intellectuals and politicians, to reflect on what goes on. And it would be, for me, it would be far too simple to say, well, populism is just a bad politics. It doesn't mean a thing. As soon as possible, we have to get rid of it. Maybe we're trying to do that in the Netherlands, but I think the problem is deeper. It's not a right to disqualify populism. We have to understand it, where it comes from, yeah? What goes on in the lives of people and in the minds of people. And that's one of the issues and topics I am trying to get a grip on, is where does it come from, and how can we respond to it? And I think that's one of the obligations of a serious politics these days, to respond to it. But in order to respond, you have to listen and you have to understand. Now, in a gezagscrisis, I see the crisis of authority as a crisis of a relationship between, on the one hand, the peoples, humans within society, and you can say the elites or the ruling class. And don't get me wrong, I'm a part of those elites. Yeah, and I think both the people and these elites, or the ruling class, the people who have had a high education, has been through a fundamental, and I would even say a disruptive change in the last decades. And the result of that change is, in the end, a lack of legitimacy. Yeah. And I think it's important to understand there's a difference between legitimacy and legality. Yeah. Legitimacy points to, you could say, the right in a pre-legal sense, the right in a moral sense, or even in an emotional sense, to formulate what's right. So the right, who are the ones who have the right to formulate what's right? Yeah. And the Dutch word gezag is related to gezeggen. I'm willing to listen. Ik laat mij iets gezeggen. Yeah. So gezeggen, zeggen, saying, and listening are linked to each other. Yeah. And both the people have to listen, but have something to say. And also the one who governs are the one who have to listen in order to say something that resonates with the people. Yeah. And I think that exactly this resonance has gone wrong, and populism is in fact the rise of other peoples who are saying something that resonates with the people, and we are not ready, or at least a part of the people or society is not able to hear what those maybe delusions are, that they are presenting to us and what they're saying. And even you can say that in an authority crisis, and where the loss of legitimacy goes so far that it's not only points to a certain party, but points to the system itself, a distrust in democracy itself, a distrust in the rule of law itself. And I think we have to seriously think about the uprisings and the revolutions we saw in the past. In the 18th century, in the eve of the French Revolution, this lack of authority, and the idea that the authority is listening to what goes on with the people. Or in the 30s in Germany, with the rise of fascism and Nazism. Or even in the revolution of the 60s, in which a former, also in our country, societal structure is demolished, for some good reasons in a way, but it's also the beginning of a change of culture, in which the traditional legitimate instances of power have become illegitimate. Yeah. So they lost their legitimacy, and not in a judicial sense, not in a sense of laws and covenants and contracts, but in a moral sense, or even in an emotional sense for the people themselves. Now, this crisis of authority we are witnessing these days has something to do with, I said, it's the loss of this shared experience of a common good. This experience that brings the people together with the elites, or the ones who are in charge and are taking care of this order. Maybe because the people are not experiencing this order as legitimate as the presence of justice, for example, in a distributive sense. This order is experienced as a disorder or injustice. Whether they're right or not, I'm not saying, but I'm trying to sketch the dynamics. Yeah. So the erosion of this shared experience of a common good has a long history, I think, and Jelle van Baardenwijk also pointed to the Enlightenment, and on the one hand, we are, I think, can be happy with all those fundamental insights that have been formulated during the Enlightenment, but on the other hand, I can say we have to be honest that in a moral sense, maybe the Enlightenment is also a problem. But I won't go into that. Maybe we can later on. But culturally speaking, I think one of the central motives we already saw during the Enlightenment, and it has become, you can say, accelerated in this cultural revolution of the 60s, is the so-called liberation of the individual. He was liberated from being, in a way, a burger, bourgeois. He was being liberated from being the citizens and the bourgeois in institutions. I thought a lot about that, and published a lot about that, and I won't go into it too deep, but one of my main ideas and thesis is that the process of what we call in the philosophy atomization, the fragmentation of society in atomistic individuals, that they are not really related to one another anymore. This atomization on the one hand, and subjectification, so our own experience of what we find nice, what we find good, becomes more and more subjective, and a subjective experience. I even mention it, belevingssolipsisme, solipsism of the experiencing subject, using his telephone in virtual screens, uniting with maybe virtual companions. But this subjectification is a very profound process, and it's also linked up to technology, of course. But in an economic sense, you can say that this cultural revolution in the 60s in the Western world prepared for the so-called neoliberal revolution in the 80s. And so we see that on the one hand, a kind of an abstract morality tied up with an idea of an economic order in which national boundaries become superfluous. You can say that more and more the traditional order in which those boundaries can regulate trade, can regulate the interactions between people and money, they were all reshaped to promote, you can say, the optimum of economic transactionalism. Now we see here, during this period, the transformation of capitalism, and I'm not against capitalism, but against some manifestations, where we see the transformation of capitalism in this period. In its post-industrial phase of what the sociologist Emmanuel Castells has called informationalism, in which, of course, the ICT, the information technology becomes very important, but we see the rise of internet, we see the rise of what we call the experience economy, also the leisure economy, and in the tourist industry, as you witness it on your island. And at the same time, we see that the power is transformed to the network. So this is the so-called rise of the network society, which is a transnational idea of power or organization, which has, in some sense, has become depoliticized. It becomes the field of different actors in which you can say the big industries, the financial actors, but also even universities are all tied up in a global network that in which decisions are made that sometimes are even not. It is not even possible to withstand within a country. Think about the huge impact of the technological revolutions we are witnessing and all the contracts, but also the systemic organization that makes it possible that we are sharing the same technological environment. This is in which politics has become almost powerless. Yeah? We are dependent on what we called those big companies. Yanis Varoufakis speaks of techno-feudalism as another way of addressing this fascinating thing in which power is not limited anymore to, and the ultimate power is not really limited more to the state, the nation state, or even the domain of politics, as it seems, because in the end, I think politics is the decisive factor, and we have to respond to it in a political way. Okay, so this, during this period, we see a transformation of space, and you can say there's a space that is boundless, and Castells called, I think this is a very nice name for it, a space of flows, in which flows of capital, flows of information, flows of people, then they are not limited to the place of living anymore. Those flows are limitless, going around the world, capital going around the world, information. And in those flows within the network, there are certain, you can say, nodes in which the big decisions are made, nodes and hubs. Yeah? So power resides in those nodes, yeah? And the big cities and the places and the boardrooms, but also in physical nodes around the world, from Silicon Valley to Washington or Beijing. Yeah. And this is where the people who are in charge are the people who are a part of this network. And I think one of the danger of this kind of capitalism is that it is kind of violent towards what we call the locality. Now, this is a space of flows and a space of places. And I think when I mention this division, I think you can all experience in Aruba, not only when I point to technology, but of course also to this tourism and the way the power works within this network, you know, that we're living in. You know? So one of the dangers, and that is the topic of our book, Het Goede Leven en de Vrije Markt, The Good Life and the Free Market. One of the dangers of this development is that the place becomes over-exploited. In Dutch we can have the nice word roofbouw. Yeah? We build something, and at the same time there is a plundering or a roof. Yeah? It's a roofbouw. Like you can have roofbouw in the soil when the farmer wants to produce too much, and in fact there's roofbouw, yeah? Emptying the soil you are dealing with. So I think that when we take a look at what's happening right now with this populism I was talking about, that in a way people sometimes caught up in their own fantasies, of course, but are experiencing in different places the power of the network, and they have the experience that they're powerless, that they can't do anything to change their lives. They are not a political actor anymore, and even the politicians they're addressing, the sometimes those politicians say, well, we can't do anything about it. It's just how life goes. This is how modernizations go. This is what capitalism is. Look at the profits it has brought you. This is simply the way it goes. This is, we cannot do anything about it. We have to deal with the legislations that is there, the institutions that are there, the transnational organizations we are part of. So from this point of legality, that might be right, but from the point of legitimizing the power, that might be fundamentally wrong. And I think populism is, in fact, this public response to that kind of politics, to that kind, experiencing the order as an order in which the people have become powerless and even their own politicians have become powerless. So there is a power void, you can say. And when there is a power void, we long for power, we long for empowerment. And I think Donald Trump is exactly the figure who is once more like a traditional macho, claiming his power, maybe because he's witnessing his own powerlessness as well. Yeah, but it's, I think that it resonates, has something to do with someone saying, we can change, and we can break this order, and we do it, and we say, America first. Yeah. So he's breaking away from these networks, breaking away from the actors within these networks, the universities, media, transnational institutions. So he's in fact demolishing the structure of globalization itself, as we witnessed it, as it developed itself the last 50 years. So, and it comes out of you could say, a void of power. And in the end, this void points to what I tried to make clear in the Gezagscrisis, to such a thing as a community void. A community that has been hollowed out. Yeah. There's in fact not a sense of a real community and the safety and warmth and the sense of belonging of that community. We can go in that later on. I have to finish my presentations, but fortunately I'm at the end as well. So some last remarks. Yeah. I think what has been neglected or even repressed, not has been integrated in a civilizational form, returns in its uncivilized and even brutal form. And I think in a way that is what we're witnessing these days. A kind of a brutal attempt to empower. Yeah. And we don't know what it will affect and how this movement will end. But one thing is sure, we can go back to what was. And I think one of the main tasks of the politics right now is to reflect on this, what I call this discomfort, this experience of disorder we see in our Western societies. And I think an interesting idea would be to take into account Aristotle's division between what he calls the good constitutions and the bad ones, the deranged constitutions. And he makes a division between kingdom on the one hand and tyrannical regime on the other. Aristocracy on the one hand and oligarchy on the other. A political community on the one hand and its derangement in the rule of the mob. Yeah. And it's related to what he calls the difference between a community. Yeah. In those good constitutions, the central political aim is the common good. For the good kingdom, for the good aristocracy, and for the good political community. And when we're talking about the common good, and we're talking about the goods of the soul, the good of the way we live, in different political communities and parts of that community, from the family onwards. Yeah. And what is it about? What are you cultivating in those communities, in those parts of the big polis or political communities? What is it about? Why are you together? Are you a member or are you an individual? And when you're a member, you have to share something within the family or within the companies you're working in. What is it about? And Aristotle makes this division between oikonomia. We all talk about economics these days. We also talk about ecology. And it has the same root, oikos. Oikos is the place we live in. It's in fact your home. Yeah. It's your home ground. Yeah. And is your home ground taken care of in a cultural way so it can flourish together with the people living there? Or is it exploited? And so there's a difference between oikonomia as keeping your house in order, taking care of the house where people live together, in your countries and in all those different places, and also in your companies. Are we together in this? And what are the goods of the soul that are cultivated in that environment? Or is there grammatistica? Is the ambition becoming rich? The external goods, not the goods of the soul, he says, not the way people live and their important customs and virtues, but are it external goods? Fame, glory, money. So it's not about the ones who are in charge only. It's about the way people live. What are they living for? What makes their heart beat? And I think that there's a special obligation for the ones who are in charge to take care of the oikonomia, keeping the house in order. Beware of over-exploitation in which the external goods become leading and ending up in the disintegration of all those common good communities. So what I hope for is that Aruba takes care of its constitution, takes care of its societal soundness, takes care of the common good, the goods of the soul. And I wish for Aruba a flourishing political community, and I hope also the kingdom we share can flourish in togetherness. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Verbrugge. And at this moment, we'll now further open the conversation to the room and invite you to join in our Q&A session. I'd like to welcome back to the stage our previous speakers, Dr. van Baardewijk, Esther, Emerencia Gomez, please come back to the stage, and Dr. Verbrugge, please join us on stage. And for you, the audience, I hope you took note of any questions you may have. There are runners with the microphone throughout the audience. Runners, you can make yourself known to the audience so that we can host our Q&A session. Welcome back. And we're waiting for Esther. There you go. You just got your tea. You can bring your tea up. And so, runners, can you make yourself known so I can see you as well with the microphone? Oh, yes, I see you over there. In the middle right here, there's a gentleman with a question. Good morning, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Ike Posner. I'm a retired anesthesiologist. I enjoyed the talks very much. And I would like to pick Professor Verbrugge's brain. 25 years ago, I was in China, and they were like 20 years behind the Western world. Recently, I came back from China, and I think they're like 20 years ahead of us. And we always criticize the way they control their population. The other day, I was watching a program called by Roxanne van Iperen, and she talked about Project 2025. I would like to pick your brain about that, and what's your opinion, and is it going to work? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think it's clear that the rise of China has been very successful. But I think the main question is for what term? On what term? I think we don't have to forget about, I think, also the disorganization that is taking place in China. And maybe it sounds strange for you right now. But I think one of the big challenges China is facing is the really scarifying fall of the rates of births. So that becomes very, very, I think, problematic within decades. And what it will end up, we're not sure. So I'm not saying, well, China will take over the world. We don't know. The technology and the process of globalization, modernization, has taken its toll in China as well. It's been successful so far, but the question is, what will it look like within 10 or 20 years? And we're talking about that, and I think this fall of fertility rate is really a very huge development. So that on the one hand. On the other hand, Project 2025, well, it might be a failed attempt. I think one of the problems with Donald Trump right now, there's a lot of problems, but is of course he's talking like not only as a businessman in trying to make deals everywhere, but also he is very focused on the way things look. Yeah, it's like you could say that a business-wise orientation on politics. It's marketing. It has become marketing. How does it look? And we know. I'm not sure. And when you see that this disruptive influence at the moment right now, I can understand why a lot of Americans have voted for him. On the one hand, Bill, I'm not in favor of Donald Trump, but I can understand what goes on. But to really being able to transform a society, this is not a question of marketing. There's something to do what comes up bottom up. And on the streets, in your cities, within the judicial system, in the educational system. And the question is this transformation we're witnessing right now in the United States more an issue of power and marketing, or is it a real cultural transformation we're witnessing? And I think when it would be possible to transform the United States in this cultural sense, then maybe there's a chance. But we see that's related also to this marketing, but also to the way this power politics. There's a serious chance of a breakdown of American society as well. That would be, in fact, the same process we saw in the former Soviet Union. So. I'm not a prophet, but I think that there's a serious risk of a huge inner crisis in America that's already going on, of course, but also a breakdown. And well, we'll see. But Europe is also in a rather bad shape, I would say.
Thank you very much. By the way, Aruba is also witnessing population getting older, and in 2017 we had about 1,300 births, and last year I don't think we made 800. So we have more or less the same problem. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. In front here. Do I also have runners on this side?
Hello.
Oh, go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lynn. Hello, Minister Posner. Any other ways, how does fair play a factor? I mean, I know I'm an Arubian. I lived in the United States for quite some time. And what I'm seeing in the United States, including in my neighborhood, my community that I typically am working or living in, there's a huge amount of fear, especially among immigrants, that while you might see protests on television, they're not leaving their homes, they're not wanting to be part of the dialogue of what should happen in their community. But coming back to Aruba, I also see some degree of fear that causes people not want to engage or speak up when they feel what is happening, whether it's policy or just realities on the ground, how they would like to see change in their society. So how do you, keeping in mind that Project 2025 question in the back of your mind, how do you see the common good being able to be achieved, perhaps with removal of fear or encouragement by our political leaders, that there is no reason to fear if the community is asking for change?
Thank you. Beautiful topic. Questions? Fair play is a notion from the world of sports. I think it's very important to teach each other how to be a member of a community, how to be together with the use of sports. In playing soccer, you already learn what's honest, what's not honest, wat grenzen zijn, wat integriteit is. Sport is a practice of morality. And speaking out, speaking truth to power, speaking morality to power, so to say, is something that you also learn in sports. So it's a very interesting notion, fair play. I also think that we need people, to put it bluntly, you need elites, parents in the first place, sports teachers, managers, politicians. You need an elite that says that's not honest, that's not fair play. You need to set the example. Some people need to tell other people, hey, this is how we do things here. That's being a grown-up. And we have, maybe, I don't know in Aruba, but in the Netherlands we tend to forget this, yes. Everybody has his own idea of fair play. That's not how it works. There are clear conditions under which people can cooperate well and flourish, and there are clear exploitative conditions, toxic conditions. And some people need to stand up and say, hey, this is not how we work here. And the difficulty of today's moralism, or today's wokeness, so to say, is that we have very peculiar, very specific standards of fair play. But generally speaking, we also have very normal standards. We need to nourish those normal standards of fair play. Now, I hope that comes close to your intuitions. That's how I would see it. Also from an Aristotelian perspective. So fair play is not something that resonates in your heart or mind. No, it's a shared practice. And some people build the practice a little bit more than others because they're older, they're better, can be all kinds of things. But yeah, you need to learn to speak out because your sister, your mother, your teacher has shown you how to, has equipped you to stand up.
Thank you. Just go ahead. Just a quick note to my friends at Elite. I cannot see the time moving, so if you can just activate that for me so that I don't go over time. Go ahead, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Suzette Dumfries, and I am a nation builder. And what that entails is that I look at the institutional design of countries and how that design serves the purpose of the country and of the nation. I have a philosophical question for Dr. Jelle. So, Dr. Jelle, you spoke about the common good. My question is, how do we as a nation determine what is good, and how do we measure that it has become common? The second question I have, let me kill two birds with one stone, is for Esther Emerencia. Thank you very much for localizing and the way you did it was very beautiful. My very specific question is based on the question you posed. What is the home that we are building together? My specific question to you is, as an Aruban leading an institution in Aruba, what role do you see for institutions in Aruba to build that common good together?
Maybe you start because you haven't spoken yet.
Should be on, yeah.
Jelle has given me the mic first. Ms. Dumfries, thank you for your question, first of all. And I would say times are changing, and change is the only constant. Obviously, there is a quickening happening at this point in time where people want to see things kind of slow down. We've been moving at a very fast pace, and haven't been given the opportunity to be the first female director of the post office in more than 135 years of postal services in Aruba. It also means a different touch, because the theme of the conference, the home we build together, I have been giving it thought prior to this conference. Our strategic plan is entitled Trecha nos Cas Postal, because it calls upon people to come together and identify what we want to do together. You're already together at work. So here there's a lot of leaders of different organizations and companies, NGOs, governments, from Aruba and others countries. And it's always about identifying what that common good is. And it depends on the location, the group. And it's actually, once you've identified it, that it captivates the attention of the leader, who's the one who will give the narrative to inspire others to follow. But the identifying it, that is the challenge. And I did bring forward what is the home that we want to build together, because maybe sometimes we don't give it enough thought. We have been experiencing a lot of division, fragmentatie, and people sometimes disassociate from one another. And within a small community as Aruba, that can be at the detriment to us all. So it's about the narrative that we use, the approach, and as I had mentioned, the managing of relationships, especially in a small community as ours, because we are all interconnected. And you cannot afford to burn bridges, because we will meet each other right across the corner when we get out of this building. And we will have to continue working together, maybe not where we work on a daily basis, but in the fundación, in the organization, in the community, we meet each other again and again. So for me, it's very important, the relationship management and the approach and showing the value. And then also listening. Listening so that as a leader, you can identify and recognize the dream that is already living within the people, and so that you can then start inspiring and leading others to act collectively towards that direction.
Thank you. Yellow, do you still remember your question?
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Dumfries, for this very fundamental question, core question. Yeah, what is the common in Aruba? What is Aruba? Perhaps also how is it related to the Netherlands? These are all questions to explore. But the common good is not only Aruba being a small community. I like the humbleness of the country, but you have a port. You have airplanes landing here. It's full of flora and fauna in an astonishing and inspiring way. Aruba is very large in terms of institutions and nature. For instance, you're related to the Dutch army. You're part of the Dutch kingdom. This is not a small thing. We are not that tight related to other islands or in a different way. So you're also part of the Netherlands and we are part of you. We can evaluate this in different terms and maybe this is not how it should look in the future. I don't know. It's also up to you. But at the moment I think we share a lot. So there is on a level of institution, on a more abstract level, Aruba is much more than only a we of people here in the local community. So to put it very opportunistic, you're also a hub for the Netherlands, relating us to the South of America, relating us to countries to Venezuela, to in fact whole of South America. So you're part of an international network and at the same time an ensouled network because we share language, we share history. And now you came up with the question, how do you measure these things? Well, history is hard to measure. Culture is hard to measure, and I can give you books and names of people trying to do that, like Engelhardt or the World Values Survey. Look it up if you find it interesting. Things like community value, shared values, they are measurable, but I'm not sure whether we need to look into that. It's namely not only a thing of, it's not about measuring, it's about feeling in a way, yeah? Identity. So I don't know, Ms. Dumfries, how you perceive it yourself, but I think that identity is also something, I mean, if the plane lands here and you enter the island, you feel something. And for me, outsider perspective, I admit, this is already something that I can participate in. And it's a very shallow participation, but it's deepening and then you see, hey, there is a common good and in a way I'm related to it. I didn't have it in Florida, so apparently there is something we share. And then the question, is there something like an Aruban identity? I leave that up to you. I'm too far away to speak about that. But in relation to the Netherlands, I would say that there exists something. And why measure it? Why not cultivate it?
Yeah.
Yes.
My deliberate intention behind the question was to see where, the question about, okay, so at what point and how do you measure if it is common, is because my real question is, can we at one point have this conversation at the kingdom level? And what do I mean by that? The common good should be common within the kingdom, with the kingdom having one identity, the Dutch identity.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Do you want to take this question?
Okay. Yeah. I think Jelle talked about sports and soccer. And what is the identity of the one who is the goalkeeper and the one who's in the, playing the soccer and in the spits, we call it? I don't know what the striker. Yeah, nice word. What is the communality between them? I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. When we're talking about identity, it's not good to think that we have to identify certain characteristics and ways of behaving that were all the same. I think the most important thing is that there's a sense of belonging to a community, a group in which different people have played different roles. And I think maybe one of the setbacks in the relationship also between the Netherlands and Aruba is not giving honor to this fundamental idea that you don't have to be the same. But that you're playing together. You're playing together and you belong to something that is bigger than both of you. And so that's the way soccer can flourish. And so think about the kingdom as a playground in which different actors have different roles. But what is very important, and to come back to your question, I think you're in a way, it's an advantage to live on this island because the boundaries are in a way natural. You have to live on the island as long as you're in this body. This is the place where you live. These are the streets. These are the beaches. So, and then the question comes: what is? How can the beaches flourish? So you have to have this conversation about what is a flourishing island. What does that mean? And not simply in terms of grammatistica of making money, but for the good life. What does it mean for children? And then I think you have a lot of common ground, even between the different political parties. That the common ground is this island. The streets, we can always see, is this a street where people are neglected? Is this a neighborhood where people are being neglected, where the houses are being neglected? Is this the oikos that is not flourishing? Or is it an oikos that is flourishing? And so it's a question. I think a lot of elements of the good life are even pointing beyond the political divide, in my opinion, at least when you're willing to take a look at what goes on and what it means for people. And they're even beyond the ideological divide or the racial divide. This is what I'm always stressing also in the Netherlands. Just take care of a neighborhood. And what does that mean? It's like if you want to play soccer, then it's not possible that one is coming too late or is shouting at the other. It has a moral implications to make the soccer flourish. So it has moral implications, not from an ideological perspective, but from the perspective of the island itself, in the way you behave and how you deal with what goes on. And I think it sounds very simple, but at least becoming aware of the different elements of what a good life means and what keeps communities together and how souls can develop in a flourishing way, I think is very important instead of this narrow economical idea of simply the biggest revenues for people, or the salaries, or even working hours. There's a much bigger story needed to make an island like this flourish, and at least try to have this open conversation in which people can bring to the table what is really at stake for living together and raising up your children for a new future.
Thank you so much. I see your hand up, but unfortunately, and I also see you in the back, I acknowledge you, but unfortunately, when I asked for the time, they told me you have no time left. So I'm sure we can continue the conversation during the networking sessions, the breaks, and the lunch with these three wonderful individuals. But at this time, we must move on with the program. So I thank the three of them. A round of applause for Esther, for Jelle, for Ad. Thank you very much. I invite you to join us back into the audience. And we'll now continue with the second part of this morning's session, Aruba Common Good in Action. So please take a moment to watch the following testimonial videos as local voices share the common good in action right here in Aruba. Your attention, please.
Para mim é importante que o bota ajuda back comunidade, para tem me explica essa aqui com tem viaja, tem gente tem mais necessidade que nós outros.
esfuerzo na bem-estar coletivo. Uma sociedade camina nossa trabalho junto para educação riba nível, para ter boa interação com ela, então base social firme.
Everything you're seeing here. So common good for me is the well-being of the community, right?
Ora mi hasi trabalho voluntário, mi coração tá contento. Dus é echt algo que me tá senti contento de hasi.
E nanta sinti, nanta traha trabalho, basta digno, nanta sinti nanta haya basta trato correto, nanta sinti não porta nang mes, basta sei tá muito importante.
Nós estamos turcos para nos tur porta bom de sociedade. Então, não somente para grupo de pessoas, mas para todas as pessoas que formam parte da comunidade. É importante passar que vós, nós temos que começar a trabalhar juntos para lograr um impacto positivo para a nossa comunidade. Porque tem hora nós pensamos individual, mas nós precisamos que sim, uma sociedade estável, nós não logra.
Tem gente que quer seguir estuda, seguir cresce, seguir ganhar conhecimento novo. Então, me quer assim, nós por foco sobre parte e nós fazemos coisa grande.
Individualization was an important part in the history, but right now we notice that we are kind of completely disconnected from each other and from nature.
Nós está hopi druk, dus é vida, nós turta traha, vooral adulto nang, pero me quer sei muito não também tá sinti, então ora que botar assim essa aqui tá criar algo outro, me bisa quase botar by back na simpleza, não? Na onde nós começar, mas nós começar em que assim na de nossa cultura. Hope aia passar, essa aqui tá é vida que ainda não tá tinha, tá uma vida hope mais tranquila.
When you just try to prepare yourself for the future, you might just make the world a better place. It's like after you prepare yourself for the future, the world will be extremely different.
We, of course, thank these local individuals, and may they inspire each of us to reflect on our own role and what we can do in our own communities. From local stories and lived experiences, we now move to research taking place right here in Aruba. Thais Franken is a lecturer and researcher at the University of Aruba, where she is affiliated with the Department of Public Administration and Organizational Sciences, and serves as program manager of the Masters in Governance and Leadership. She is also a researcher at the Aruba Institute of Good Governance and Leadership, an independent competence center focused on strengthening island governance through research and capacity building. Her PhD research focuses on public value governance in small island states, examining how civil society organizations in Aruba and Bonaire contribute to public value creation within the multi-level governance structure of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Her work spans the health, social, and cultural sectors and combines comparative analysis with practice-oriented insights. In addition to her academic role, Thais is actively involved in the Aruban community as a policy advisor and board member of several socio-cultural organizations, where she works at the intersection of research, governance, and societal impact. In her presentation this morning, she will explore how the common good is built in small island contexts by reframing public value governance theory around voice, around trust, and coordination, drawing on research, data, and practice from Aruba. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Thais Franken.
Bon dia! It's a full house this morning. I know, was ano sa landa parang tiki, untiki energie, untiki jeito nem akur pa ay mainta. So, bon dia to gente. See. First of all, I would like to sincerely thank the Aruban government and the conference organizers for creating this space, and for the invitation to reflect together on the common good here in Aruba, and at a moment when the conversation feels both urgent and deeply relevant. I don't have a clicker, so I'm not sure for the presentation. I have a presentation slide. Okay. At a moment, this moment, when this conversation feels both urgent and deeply relevant. As a local, I'm grateful to be part of a dialogue that brings together policymakers, civil society, knowledge institutions, and community actors, not to speak past one another, but to think together about what it means to flourish as a society. For me, this is not a distant topic. It connects directly to my work as a researcher, a PhD candidate, a university lecturer, and to my engagement with civil society on this island. And to these questions that have guided me through much of my thinking over the years. And it is from this place that I would like to begin. What holds a society together when prosperity is not enough? Across the world, and on Aruba, prosperity has grown. Economies expand, technologies advance, and performance indicators improve. Yet, at the same time, many societies experience rising inequality, declining trust in institutions, social fragmentation, and a growing sense of disconnection. From a governance perspective, this tells us something important. The challenge we face today is not only economic or technical. It's an institutional and it's also relational. It concerns how people feel connected or disconnected from society, whether they feel included, represented, and recognized. This raises a deeper question on how we understand progress and societal development, particularly in young, newly autonomous societies where nation building is not only a civic project, but also a social one. In that sense, the common good is not merely a moral aspiration, it's a governance problem. And that problem becomes particularly visible when viewed from a small island perspective. On a small island like Aruba, governance dynamics are intensified, and you all know this. Proximity is high, roles overlap, formal institutions and informal relationships intersect actually constantly. Decisions taken in policy arenas do not disappear into abstraction. They are quickly felt in families, neighborhoods, and our communities. From an academic point of view, small islands functions as revealing systems. They compress governance processes that in larger societies remain dispersed or sometimes hidden. Feedback loops between policy, trust, and institutional credibility are short. Strengths become visible quickly, but so do our weaknesses. This makes small islands not an exception to governance theory, but a place where its assumptions are tested more clearly. It is from a small island lens that I approach my own work. In my PhD research titled Creating Value from the Ground Up, and in my engagement with civil society and government, one question has always been central. Can there be a common good without equal voice? Not equal outcomes, not perfect consensus, but the equal capacity to articulate needs, to influence decisions, and to shape what counts as public value. Because when voice is unevenly distributed, the common good risks becoming something that is defined about society rather than with society. And this raises a second closely related question. Common good for who? When we talk about equal voice, we're also talking about diversity and inclusion, about whose experience count as knowledge, whose needs are recognized as public concerns, and whose perspectives shape our collective priorities. In a diverse society like ours, the common good cannot be separated from inclusion, because exclusion, even when unintended, weakens the whole. As a public administration and organizational scientist, people often ask me a reasonable question. Why civil society? Why are you not focusing on the government? And I usually smile a little, because in our field, government is still often treated as the default locus of governance. But in small island contexts like Aruba, the assumption does not hold in the same way, or at least not for me. Here, civil society organizations are not secondary actors. They are not an add-on to public policy. They are woven into the fabric of the community. They are where care continues when the policies we are creating end, where culture lives when funding cycles stop, and where trust is maintained when institutions feel distant or overloaded. And honestly, on an island, and everyone in this room knows at least one of them personally, so that is why in my PhD research, I focus explicitly on civil society organizations in the Dutch Caribbean, not as substitutes for the government, but as essential actors of the creation of public value within a small island governance system. The choice of focus domains was equally challenging. The domains health, social protection, and culture were selected based on prior research I conducted over the past few years, my personal ambitions and also my personal engagement, and complementary baseline assessments of the civil society landscape on Aruba and Bonaire. Together, these sources pointed to the domains where vulnerability is high and public value is also fragile, but where community resilience and commitment are also particularly strong. Importantly, the selection of these domains was comparative by design. So studying civil society across sectors with different institutional settings and relationships with the state allows me to better understand why some actors are more resilient or effective than others. Studying these domains was therefore not only an academic choice, but one grounded in the lived realities of our communities. Engaging with civil society in these domains revealed something else. Much of public value governance theory has been developed in large by Western states or scholars that come from Western states. Contacts characterized by scale, distance, and relatively stable institutions and infrastructures. These theories offer valuable insights, but when applied uncritically to small island state contexts, their limitations become visible. On islands, governance is not distant, it's personal, it's relational, sometimes uncomfortably close. Institutions are not simply there, they're still evolving, they're still becoming. Many of our institutions were established within colonial governance structures or carry institutional logistics shaped by them. These legacies continue to influence how authority is exercised, whose knowledge is considered warranted, and how public value is defined and delivered. This does not mean our institutions are failing, but this does mean that public value is not neutral. It is shaped by history, power, and the design choices we inherit unless we consciously revisit them. Rather than starting from abstract models, my research starts from these island realities and adapts public value governance theory accordingly. From this adaptation, three mechanisms become visible through public value and how it's produced in practice, largely through civil society organizations, by all of you. Three of the mechanisms: trust-based collaboration. And this is built through proximity and relationships, but requiring institutional support to be sustained. Community-based value framing, where lived experiences and diverse voices shape what counts as what we see as value. And the last one, value-driven service delivery. Services guided by social purpose, requiring both commitment and expertise. Together, these mechanisms show that public value on islands is not incidental, but is produced through relationships, but sustained through these existing institutions. Now, the reason I am sharing this is not to stay in theory, and this is the end of the theoretical part of my presentation, because the questions I was grappling with academically were the same questions I kept hearing in practice, in conversations with NGOs, community leaders, and practitioners across Aruba. And that is where theory had to meet practice. With that in mind, the next question became very concrete. How can we strengthen the Aruban NGO ecosystem? This question guided the collaboration through the Heart and Knowledge NGO Conference back in September 2025, a joint initiative by Sede Aruba and the Aruba Institute for Good Governance and Leadership at the University of Aruba. The conference brought together diverse voices from Aruba, the region, and beyond, and it was made possible through the collaboration between academic partners, civic partners, and private partners. What matters most, however, was not only the program, but the space it created. NGOs and knowledge institutions came together not to perform the alignment, but to reflect critically on collaboration, capacity, and public value creation in our small island context. Out of these conversations, a shared ambition was announced: the development of an NGO Academy for Aruba. Starting this March, the Academy will move from idea to practice, supported by a broad coalition of partners, all working towards the same goal: strengthening initiatives that emerge from the community itself. The NGO Academy is not training for training's sake. It's an institutional response to a structural governance challenge. Its purpose is to strengthen voice, to sustain that trust, and enable that coordination. And to move beyond this, we also wanted to understand how these different dynamics are experienced in practice. So during this conference, we invited board members of NGOs and also managers of these NGOs to share their perspectives. And now, if we look at the screen, three things will stand out. First, and this may not surprise you, civil society organizations carry a very high level of societal responsibility while operating with limited structural capacity. What this tells us is not a lack of commitment, quite the opposite. The commitment is there. But commitment alone is no longer enough to sustain value-driven work in increasingly complex environments. If we move to the second pattern, we see something encouraging. Willingness to collaborate is remarkably high. There is openness. There is readiness to connect. But willingness is not the same as trust. Trust takes time. It takes continuity. And it requires institutional support if it is to last beyond individual relationships. And that brings me to the third pattern. Much of the collaboration between civil society and government and other partners is still strongly one-person dependent, rather than institutionally anchored. In a small island context, that is understandable. Proximity makes informal cooperation easier, but it also makes collaboration fragile. When people move on, priorities shift, or roles change, the cooperation can weaken or disappear altogether. This is why strong relationships, valuable as they are, must be matched with strong institutions. Aruba is a young country. With 40 years of status aparte, we embarked on a distinct trajectory of governance and institutional development, and we have accomplished a great deal. But civil society has also carried much of that weight, often quietly and often without consistent or structural support. The richness of our Aruban communities are already here. The challenge before us is to match that richness with institutions strong enough to sustain it. Because if we want stronger communities, Aruba, we need stronger institutions across government, civil society, and spaces in between. So what does this mean for policy and practice? It means recognizing that collaboration cannot be mandated by policy alone. Many civil society organizations experience a lack of mutual respect in their interaction with other organizations, government partners, and private stakeholders alike. They feel their initiatives are undervalued, their expertise overlooked, or their work absorbed without recognition or having shared ownership. From a governance perspective, this matters deeply because collaboration cannot flourish where trust is weak. And trust cannot grow where voice is not respected, autonomy is threatened, or credit is unevenly distributed. Strengthening the common good, which all of us want today, therefore requires more than these frameworks and funding lines. It requires relational governance, practices that acknowledge civil society as a partner and not as an implementer, as a co-creator of public value, not a delivery arm of the state. And in that sense, policy must do more than regulate. It must enable respectful practice. So again, I ask you this question. What holds a society together when prosperity is no longer enough? Not moral consensus, but the capacity to make voice count, to turn trust into collaboration, and to translate shared values into services that will last. That responsibility does not belong to one single actor. It belongs to all of us, policymakers, civil society organizations, the market, governments, knowledge institutions, and the Aruban community. Each indispensable, none sufficient on their own. On a small island, this task is unmistakable. and it's even more demanding. And precisely for that reason, it's also more possible. If Aruba can show that public value is not created from the top down, but through deliberate choices in how we govern, choices that make voice consequential, trust durable, and responsibility shared, then we do more than strengthen our own society. We offer the world a different answer to a question many societies are now asking: how to hold on together without leaving anyone behind. And that answer does not begin tomorrow. It does not begin in our policy papers. It begins here. You, me, with institutions we choose to build, and the way we choose to build them together.
Thank you so much, soon to be Dr. Franken. At this time, we've arrived at a very special moment. Through the signing of a series of memoranda of understanding this morning, the Aruban government and communities affirm a commitment to work together for the common good. Neighborhoods are both functional and foundational. They are the places where daily life unfolds, where we choose how we live with one another and how we relate to nature. This signing marks an important step in Aruba's effort to strengthen collaboration within neighborhoods, responding to their specific needs and shared aspirations. I now invite His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Aruba, Mr. Mike Amon, to the stage. Please welcome. And I also invite to the stage the representatives of the respective neighborhoods, Comisión Dakota, Comisión Bushiri, Comisión Village, and Comisión Mabong. Please join us on stage. And so at this moment, we will perform the signage. Prime Minister, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to give you the mic. You're just a witness, okay. And so the following representatives of each Barrio Mabong, Village Dakota, and Bushiri, you can please sign this MOU of collaboration between yourselves and the government of Aruba. Signed, sealed, and delivered. And next, are we moving on to the Bernasrat? Yes? Thank you to the representatives. Next, we welcome Okay, I was just making sure if I'm allowed to send you to lunch. And I am, that's good news for you. I am allowed to send you to lunch. So we look forward to welcoming you back here over an hour. And we wish you bon appetit and enjoy the lunch buffet, and we'll be back. Thank you.